다 건조 송주게 산 건물서 봐 대라 네 안보 장사 네 선진 통지 네 이번 의자 아 로종 강사 네 손바ทั้ง 송요 안보 장사의 강사 다 이번 의자 때문에 다 로종 강백 의자 때라 좋아해.
So we might remind ourselves that within these explanations we now find ourselves in the second part of the 7 points of mind training, which is the actual practice of giving rise to the enlightened attitude in accord with the world of appearances and phenomena. Of this particular point we have heard that it comes under 3 subheadings, one being that which has to be trained or that which has to be purified, the second being the actual main part, which is the actual implementation of bodhicitta, of the enlightened attitude, by way of exchanging ourselves for others through the commonly known practice of sending and taking. And then the third part is that of the various activities that are to be applied between sessions. From among these instructions, we now come to the second of these, the actual main part, the actual giving rise to and nurturing of bodhicitta.
Perna dongan kani yona nyarwe ni so jewa lona chadong ge dongan taba yora wa yada la zhe gong je dongan yora dan zhou la guo jie yora ma la de jie gan na qi ge dongan yora wa sha ma yan tab se ge dongan yora la la chen po dongan zhe la la tu jian de de ji pa song cho ban de yang la lang jie ni den da wa yore de yan nan che we ga la 다 첨포 동의 동안도 예제 동안도 되는 만라와 동안 첨포시 냥수님 대연도 다 생진대 당제 동안이 우서 다다 동안 용 연바 다 된지 요래 동안이 무슨 내발이.
Now the second main part from among these 3 parts, as has been said several times, is the actual practice of exchanging yourselves for others, which in particular means of exchanging your own joy and happiness for the suffering and pain of others, the practice that is commonly known as sending and taking, or as giving and taking. There's a root verse here, or 2 lines, spoken by Geshe himself, which explain this very briefly, in which it says, "While riding upon the breath, practice sending and taking alternatively." Now, to the first part, sending and taking alternatively, these are to be alternated. And what is it that we send? What is it that we take? We first take upon ourselves all the suffering of all beings within the various realms of existence. And we commonly know there are 6 of them. When, for instance, we look at the hell beings, the predominant suffering in the hell realms is that of intense heat or cold. The hells are subdivided into cold and hot hells, and they suffer immeasurably from this. If we look at the beings in the hungry ghost realm, their predominant suffering is that of intense hunger or thirst. Looking at the animal realm, the main suffering there is that of being enslaved and being killed, to be eaten. And if we look at our own human realm, the predominant sufferings here are those of birth, old age, sickness, and death. Then we move on to the realm of the demigods, the so-called asuras. Their main suffering is that of constant fight and strife. And then finally we come to the god realms, who, when we look at it at the first, if we give it just a cursory glance, who actually live in rather fortunate circumstances, enjoying all sorts of pleasures, but nevertheless this pleasure is also eventually coming to an end, and that inevitable change that is going to come causes these gods great suffering. So looking at all of these beings and all the suffering that they have to constantly endure, looking at all these various realms within samsara, which are all invariably characterized by one sort of suffering or another, in this way we give rise to great compassion towards all of these beings, and we set out to take their suffering upon ourselves.
Tateta with any Rejuki, Tongila Doman Mandrava, Sunyam Sunyumati, Candidating it and it don't take you Sana, Kinjunga Jane Nebis, and Aron Sanjay Tanji Sanjil, Nyamumba, Decho, Yedum, the Moon, Naja Cholu, Tiget and Lemandrava Sani, then it don't take you. Don't let the young Junda with the Kinjunga Damba. Nyamumba, the Telatini, Jitney, never Telatini, any, don't let the young.
Now, if we take a good look at all of these beings and seeing all of the various sufferings which they constantly have to endure, we might ask ourselves, where does all of this suffering come from? What is the origin? What is the general origin of all of this suffering in the various realms within this cycle of existence? It has to be said very clearly that the origin of all of such suffering is the negative deeds, the negative activities that beings are constantly engaged in. All the negative doing, all the negative activity of whatever sort which comes through the influence of ignorance of beings is the cause of all the sufferings which they eventually later on have to endure, have to experience. So that being the case, all of these beings are constantly performing acts which become the cause of further suffering. Therefore, they experience all of these sufferings constantly. This is the underlying cause for the experience of suffering of whatever sort.
Maya Jilla Sunjata, Pama Senji Tanji, Senjila Yebig, Duman Natoba, Tata Duman Yamsu, Yung Yambareva, Bena, Nyarwege Senji Yana, Tata Sadung Duman, Yung Yambareva. Then you are on the data, May Java Lamba Tanji, Bena, Navig Dumari, Lefty Yana, Tata, Navig, Nasato, Susaka Duman, Yamsu, Yung Yambareva. Then drive Dongan number na chopa tiedang. Then it Dongan the Jones Kenjung, Semji la Yab, Nyamomba to na. Take it less abatum. The Nyamomba te Tomji. Doggy Longwar Joe, number 30, Dongarda, Dongag, Joge, Nyamomba, Ledon keep out in Naranga Chulangi and the song.
Having familiarized ourselves with this point, we then again switch our focus back upon our own mother. This own mother of ours who has been so kind to us, and all the other beings for that matter who have invariably been our mothers at one time or other, they equally undergo all sorts of sufferings. Just like the beings in the hell realms suffer from intense heat and cold, which through their own negative deeds they have brought upon themselves, also our mothers undergo all sorts of suffering which they have brought upon themselves by way of acting under the influence of the one or the other, or a combination of the various emotional defilements, such as pride and anger and avarice and desire, etc. All of these are designed only to bring about suffering and nothing else whatsoever. Now, if we concentrate ourselves particularly on that mother of ours, we would then imagine in the course of this practice how we take all the suffering that our mother has to endure, ever had to endure, and ever will have to endure upon ourselves.
Temne Marange Lambarzawa Yen. Then Marana Muso Sanjing Donata, Yamamata, Musumara Lane Tomna, then Maruka Sana, Gawa, Trodo, Gine, Gawig, Nambayoni Yon.
So as we proceed with this training, with this practice of actually training ourselves in this, we imagine repeatedly, again and again, how we take all the suffering, all the pain, all the causes for suffering and pain, and all the causes and the causes for future suffering and pain, all our mothers upon ourselves. We do so in a joyful way, and as we imagine this, we imagine how indeed all of these causes, pains, and sicknesses, for sufferings of whatever sort, truly are being taken away from our mother and dissolve into ourselves, to disappear within ourselves. This is a training that we are supposed to be doing very joyfully, and it is a training that we need to repeat again and again. Now, having taken something of our mother, of all of these beings who are our mothers, then in turn we should also give something, we should also send something back. Now, what is it that we do send back? We send back all our happiness, all our joy, all the causes of happiness, of joy, our body, all the pleasurable perceptions, etc. In short, everything that causes us happiness, that causes us joy, that causes us pleasure, whatever there is of whatever positive nature that we ourselves have brought about in whichever way, we exchange this for all the pain and the negativity that we take upon ourselves. So in this way we imagine how all of this good is being sent from us to all of these beings from whom initially we have taken all their pain and suffering. I forgot to say before, when we imagine how we give all the good, all the positive, all our happiness and joy to all other beings, we should do so with an attitude of having no regret about giving all of this away to others in the least. Then it is said that while we practice so, of course, in this way, of course, we accumulate a great deal of merit. And also this merit which we accumulate through practice in this way, this again we give away, we dedicate for the welfare of others. And while we do so, we imagine that each and every single being receives the entire whole of whatever it is that we have to give in a completely perfect way and rejoices happily in receiving this gift of ours. Now, having heard this, we hear now an explanation of what the second part of this verse of Chakavaya Yeshodoshis means, where it says, riding upon your breath. This practice is being performed by way of imagining to take the suffering and pain and the causes thereof of beings upon oneself while one inhales, while one concentrates upon one's breath while inhaling. As we do so, we imagine that all the suffering, all the pain and the causes thereof of beings are being inhaled into ourselves in the form of dark light, smoke, soot, whatsoever. We imagine how we take this upon ourselves as we inhale our breath, how it enters into ourselves through our nostrils, and how it then is being dissolved into our heart centers and dissolves into our own consciousness. And as we do so, we at the same time imagine that all beings, not a single one excluded, become entirely free of all the pain, the suffering, sicknesses, and the causes thereof.
Yang observe rowana range dewa ta naun roma tangju de kala ngarange dewa harana gewa kaya de tamji dawe saram veze karbu namba nagoni saro tan tan kalamji sosu senji tamji tante ba sam veze karbu namba rong gewe ta senji tamji la ri yanda tan tante ba sam.
Then, of course, having inhaled, we will also exhale again. And as we do so, we imagine how now with our exhalation, all the good, all the positive, all the merit, everything that brings us joy and happiness, etc., all the good of the 3 times, for that matter, is being radiated towards all of these beings in the form of white, brilliant light. We imagine how it completely pervades the entire world and all the beings that inhabit this world and all the various realms, and how they truly come to partake of all the happiness, all the good, all the positive that we ourselves have ever accumulated by way of our own virtuous actions. Then after having sent all the good, all the positive in this way out to all beings, having made sure that they indeed have received this and partake of this, we then imagine that this becomes the cause for their own achievement of the awakening of Buddhahood in the future. And this in turn is a cause for our great rejoicing. This particular practice of sending and taking, sending all the good, all the positive, all the causes for joy and happiness of ourselves out to other beings, sharing it with them, and taking all the suffering, the pain, and the causes thereof upon ourselves. This is the actual main training, the actual main practice of that which we know as mind training. Whenever there's talk of mind training, then this practice of sending and taking is the actual main thing, the main thing to be trained in. Then it is said quite clearly that having concluded a formal session of practicing the sending and taking in this way, what is to be done in the post-meditation period, in the period between the concluded session and the next one. And it is said that whenever we remember this practice, whenever we remind ourselves of this particular technique of sending and taking, then just for a short moment, maybe even for a single exhalation and inhalation, we should remind ourselves of this practice and repeat it again and again in whatever situation we may find ourselves. And this then brings to a conclusion the explanation of the actual main part of the practice of mind training, which is that of sending and taking.
송지제 공부 마도나 두도도 호와라 정원 호나용 대화요 말에 두도도 동안을 얘기해. 그래서
Concerning these points, there is a quote of the great Bodhisattva Shantideva, who explains the very same, the following words. He says, failing to exchange one's own happiness for the suffering of others, it will be impossible to achieve the state of Buddhahood, and also within this world one will not experience joy or bliss. So he says quite clearly that should we fail to practice accordingly, to exchange ourselves with others in such a way as to give them, as to send to them all our happiness and the causes thereof, and to take all the suffering, their suffering and the causes thereof upon ourselves, then we will not, clearly not be able to bring about the achievement of the awakening of Buddhahood itself. Rather, we will remain within this cycle of constant involuntary rebirths, and also while we are being reborn within this cycle, we will not experience any bliss or happiness or joy, but rather more suffering. Now there's a story of the old Kadampa Geshes of the time of Chakawa himself. At that particular time, there was yet another famous Kadampa Geshe named Chariva, who came to the place where Chakawa stayed, and he stayed there for a while, and while there he gave a great number of Dharma explanations, which Chakawa at a certain occasion joined. He went there and listened to what Chariva had to say. While sitting there and listening to the instructions of Chagriva, Chagriva came to the point at which he explained this particular practice of mind training, the practice of sending and taking, and that we would be well advised to take all the suffering and pain of others upon ourselves and exchange it for all the bliss and joy and happiness of ourselves. And Chagriva, sitting there listening to these instructions, heard these instructions at that particular point of time for the very first time. So Chagawa went after that teaching then to Chariva and asked him, he said, I see you have a little instruction manual there, a little text, may I please see it? And Chariva said, yes, of course, go ahead. And Chagawa took this text and he opened it and he read that particular verse in this text in which it says, all the loss and all the suffering of beings take upon yourselves, and all your gain and joy give unto others. So here these points were again in very short and brief words very clearly explained. So Geshe Chagawa was overjoyed reading these words, and he immediately wanted to receive that particular instruction. So he asked Geshe Chagawa, this seems to be a most profound instruction, please confer it upon me. Whereupon Chagraba answered, well, actually, this is just a quote out of the teachings of Geshe Longtompa, and if you truly want to receive this instruction, you have to go and see that teaching.
Geshe Chagawa, Geshe Longtompa, Gamba, Pepsum, Geshe Longtompa, the Geshe Chari. Then I come with Travasin, and the Geshe Longtompa, the Yamundu, and the there's a Japa Dansa Zongi. Dansa Zongi, so you're Geshe Shongjumpa, Dode Pato, Niore. And Konin, then it Dansa de Zonala, then Dharmandic ne, Jogdore,
The Kadampastory.
and then Penna, that thing. Dansa Susana, Tita Cheronzo, and it's in the Dharmandic ne.
Having heard where to go, or having heard from whom to request this teaching, then Geshe Chagawa packed up and immediately went to see Geshe Longtompa. And as he got in the area where the monastery of Geshe Longtompa was situated and finally arrived at the place, he was greatly distressed to hear that Geshe Longtompa had already passed away. He had died previously, was not around anymore. Now, as is usually the case, when one master passes away, usually there is a regent who stays behind, who takes care of the affairs of the monastery, who also becomes the holder of the teaching lineages, etc. So Geshe Chagawa asked around in the monastery, asking who is the regent of Geshe Longtompa, who holds this teaching now? And he was told by presumably the monks of that monastery, well, there are two Geshes, one named Shantidevaquote, the other one named Dodhepa, and they cannot really quite agree who is going to be the regent of Geshe Longtompa. And that again distressed Chagawa greatly, because he thought, well, apparently these two Geshes are unable to agree upon who is going to be the regent of Longtompa. So apparently that teaching, the lineage of that teaching has been interrupted, that teaching is not available Now, indeed, these two Geshes, Shantidevaquote and Dodhepa, could not agree upon who should take the honor of being the headmaster of the deceased Longtompa's monastery. But to think that they were actually fighting among each other would be a wrong idea. It was rather the other way around. Geshe Shantidevaquote was already very old, very progressed in years, and on the other hand, Geshe Dodhepa was viewed, at least by Shantidevaquote, as the one who had the greater learning and the greater qualities as a teacher. Now, Dodhepa, on his part, clearly said to him and also to everybody else, you clearly being my senior, clearly being the elder one of us, the honor to lead the monastery, to take up the seats of the monastery should clearly be yours. Whereas Geshe Shantidevaquote said, but it is you who has the greater learning, it is you who is much more qualified as a teacher, therefore it is you who should take that honor upon yourself. So in this way, these two could not agree, and at least until the time of Chagawa's coming there, the problem was not yet resolved.
Geshe Chagawa de Geshe Sharawa to Tigandana Pevari. Geshe Sharawa, then Chagawa, then Kedon Jaka, Melampo, Jongdupoga, Rangelins, and Lojung, Dongwachindo, they tell a Jogo Revers. Geshe Sharawa, oh, Tingala Yori, Tingarang Yoning, Zori. I don't know, Songi Jacob, Topper and Deber Consoyana, Yamini in Google is on.
Now, Geshe Chagawa, having arrived at this place and having witnessed the situation, he deemed both of these elderly Geshes to be unresolved about the problem, and so he went on to find yet someone else from whom he could receive this teaching. he came into the presence of yet another Geshe by the name of Sharawa, and he asked him, he said, there is this old Kadampa instruction in which it says, take all loss and all pain upon yourself, and give all your gain and happiness to others. Do you possess that teaching? Could you possibly give me that teaching? And Geshe Sharawa replied, of course. This is my main practice, as it happens, and anyone, for that matter, who strives to achieve the awakening of Buddhahood will have to practice that teaching. Without that teaching, without implementing that instruction, there is no way whatsoever to achieve Buddhahood. And having said that, Geshe Sharawa, all these Geshes, gave that teaching to Chakarwa, who then in turn trained himself in it, the very same teaching as we have just received. And as a result of that, the enlightened attitude of Bodhicitta was born within himself. So from among all of these instructions, which were divided, the essential instruction of mind training itself, which are divided into that which has to be purified, the main part of the practice, which is that of the giving rise to the enlightened attitude and practicing sending and taking itself, and the third part being how we should proceed in the post-meditation session. We now come to the third part, the final one of these three. And here it says in one of the words of Chakrava Geshe Dorje himself, there's a single line in which it says 3 objects, 3 poisons, and 3 roots of virtue. Now, while we find ourselves in the post-meditation period, we constantly find ourselves under the influence of various emotional defilements or combinations thereof, and there are particular instructions how to deal with these. Now, as we find ourselves going about our daily activities, our daily business, whatever it might be, we, for instance, might find ourselves at a certain moment under the influence of desire, or passion, for that matter. At that particular moment, while we recognize the influence of this, we might just look at this emotion as what it is, and we might at the same time give rise to the thought, as I find myself in this situation, being under the influence of desire, feeling desire for something, feeling passionate about something. Not only me, myself, is in that situation, but all other beings might find themselves under the influence of this emotion as well. Therefore, may all the desire, all the passionate craving of other beings be taken away from them, and may it come to ripen within myself. Now, having in this way imagined how all the desire, all the passionate craving of beings dissolves into ourselves, we should combine this with the prayer or the wish or the aspiration that furthermore all beings may forever be free of such desire, of such passionate craving.
다 해당 도바제나 해당 기바데 무슨바지 다나 해당 기에서 송사 다 해당을 도바데 단도 생진 통기게 해당을 도바 강예바데 다당아라 해당가 도반디 단도 탐바르죠지 말한데.
So this is how we might proceed in pleasant situation. But life is not only made up of pleasant situations, and before long we might find ourselves in an unpleasant situation again, which might give rise to anger within ourselves, to displeasure of whatever sort. At the very same time, and in the very same way as we proceed with pleasing perceptions, we should also proceed with the unpleasant perceptions when we find ourselves in such a situation that bring about anger, that bring about all sorts of displeasure within ourselves. We should think similarly that in this particular moment, as I myself experience such displeasure, such anger, such hatred, whatever it might be, may all the anger, the displeasure, the hatred of all beings be taken off them, may they be freed of this, and may all of this come to ripen within myself. So the same way, in the very same way, we are asked, we are advised to proceed in pleasurable as well as unpleasant situations.
And
at the same time, having taken all the displeasure, all the anger, all the hatred upon ourselves, having completely freed beings of these emotional defilements, we should combine this with the prayer that from now on, until all of these beings achieve the awakening of complete Buddhahood, may they be forever free of this defilement of hatred, anger, etc. And then we might experience situations which are neither particularly pleasant nor particularly unpleasant, which are not anything of any particular sort. Situations in which we find, in which we experience a certain numbness, a certain dumbness, where we want to possibly even nod off. In that particular moment, we could come to recognize that now we find ourselves under the influence of under the predominant influence of ignorance or stupidity, for that matter. We could then think in this moment that, well, again, we are not alone in this. All other beings find themselves under the very same influence of this emotional defilement. Therefore, may all the numbness, all the stupidity, all the ignorance of all beings come to ripen within myself. And in this way, we might imagine how all of such emotional defilements of all other beings come into ourselves, dissolve into ourselves, and how they are freed of the influence of ignorance, confusion, and stupidity. And again, we might combine this then with the prayer that from now on, until the achievement of the awakening of Buddhahood, may all beings, not a single one excluded, forever be free from the influence of confusion, of ignorance, of stupidity. This was the particular instruction on how we could be able to use the three predominant emotional defilements or mental poisons as the three types of opportunity and make them skillful means upon our path. That's it for now. Are there questions?